We will make generational investments. It is time to swing for the fences again. These are the bold promises from Mark Carney, signaling a major shift in Canada's economic direction. It sounds exciting, doesn't it? A vision for building a bigger, better Canada. But when you hear those big promises from politicians, do you find yourself asking the same question I do? Who is going to pay for this? It's a fair question, especially when the latest forecast from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, just released October 20th, 2025, predicts a staggering budget deficit of $82.4 billion. That's billion with a B. So what do these generational investments actually mean for you? For your retirement savings, already stretched thin by inflation? For your grocery bill, which seems to climb higher every week? For the jobs your children and grandchildren need to build their own futures? Is this an audacious plan to rebuild Canada for the next generation? Or is it a dangerous gamble with debt and inflation that could hurt the very people it's supposed to help? In this video, we are going to look past the political slogans. We will break down Carney's generational spending plan. We will analyze his ambitious Buy Canadian policy. We will weigh the promised benefits, the jobs, the revitalized industries, against the very real risks. We will analyze if this $82.4 billion gamble will actually create the opportunities he promises, or if the price tag, runaway inflation and crushing national debt, is simply too high for Canadians to bear. Stick around until the end, because understanding this gamble is crucial to understanding the economic future facing Canada and how it might impact your wallet. Decoding generational spending. So, what exactly is generational spending? It's more than just spending a lot of money. It represents a fundamental shift in economic philosophy. For decades, the dominant thinking in many Western governments, including Canada's, was focused on controlling deficits and debt. Think of it like balancing the national checkbook. The priority was often fiscal restraint, sometimes even austerity. Mark Carney is signaling a major departure from that thinking. Generational spending means prioritizing large-scale, long-term investments now. Investments in things like infrastructure, green energy, domestic manufacturing, and yes, even defense. Even if it means running significantly larger deficits in the short term. It's a belief that investing in the country's future capacity is more important right now than simply balancing the books today. Think about your own household budget. For 30 years, maybe your primary focus was paying down the mortgage as quickly as possible. That was the responsible thing to do. Now imagine deciding to take out a new, substantial loan. Not for a vacation, but to completely renovate the house, maybe add an extension, put solar panels on the roof. You're taking on more debt today because you're betting that these investments will significantly increase the home's value and maybe even save you money on energy bills in the long run. That's the core idea behind generational spending. It's a bet on future growth and future returns. And the scale of this bet is massive. Carney spoke about nation-building projects. He specifically promised that the next round of these major projects would be announced after the Grey Cup, Canada's football championship. While the specifics are still under wraps, these are likely to be huge undertakings. Think high-speed rail, national energy grids, advanced manufacturing hubs, maybe even those domestic aerospace facilities we discussed in another video. These projects are where that $82.4 billion deficit comes into play. Building nations isn't cheap. This level of deficit spending is significantly higher than Canada has seen in recent non-crisis years. So why the sudden shift? Why embrace big spending now? Carney himself provided part of the answer in his speech. He admitted, quite frankly, that over the past decade, federal spending in Canada has been spending faster than our economy was growing. He acknowledged the need to do less of some of the things that we want to do so we can do more of what we must do. His argument seems to be that past approaches, perhaps overly focused on short-term belt-tightening, have left Canada lagging behind. Lagging in critical infrastructure, lagging in industrial capacity, lagging in its ability to compete globally. He believes that now is the moment for bold action, for that swing for the fences, to catch up and build resilience for the future, even with the inherent risks of higher debt. But spending $82 billion is only half the plan. The other half, the part that aims to directly impact your local community and the jobs within it, is how he plans to spend that money. This brings us to the engine designed to drive this generational investment, the Buy Canadian policy. The Buy Canadian engine, the promise of jobs. What is the Buy Canadian policy? Mark Carney laid it out very clearly, using the steel industry as a prime example. He pointed out a stark contrast. In Europe, 80% of the steel purchased is manufactured in Europe. In the United States, 75% of the steel purchased is manufactured in the US. But in Canada, only 40% of the steel used is made domestically. Carney's reaction was blunt. That doesn't make sense. The Buy Canadian policy is designed to fix that. It's essentially a new federal procurement directive. It mandates that federal government projects, especially those large nation-building projects funded by the generational spending, must prioritize using Canadian-made goods, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian lumber, Canadian manufactured goods, Canadian technology. Think back to the 75-cent problem in defense spending we talked about previously, where 75 cents of every dollar spent flowed out of the country. Buy Canadian is Carney's attempt to tackle that problem across the entire economy. The goal is simple. When the government invests billions of taxpayer dollars, ensure those dollars circulate within Canada, supporting Canadian businesses and, crucially, Canadian workers. So what does this mean for communities that depend on industries like steel and lumber? Let's consider Hamilton, Ontario, the heart of Canada's steel industry, or forestry towns across British Columbia. These communities have faced decades of challenges from global competition and shifting economic tides. The Buy Canadian policy, coupled with massive infrastructure spending, offers a potential lifeline. Imagine the scenario. New bridges, railways, and energy projects are announced. The nation-building projects. These projects require enormous amounts of steel beams, aluminum components, and lumber. Under the Buy Canadian rules, contracts are steered towards domestic producers first. Canadian steel mills in Hamilton get massive new orders. Sawmills in BC see a surge in demand. This could lead to factories reopening or expanding. It could mean hiring more workers, creating stable, well-paying jobs, perhaps for the children and grandchildren of the 55-plus audience watching right now. This is the promise. It taps directly into a deep aspiration, the desire for strong local economies, good jobs close to home, and a sense of national self-reliance. It's about rebuilding the industrial heartland, and the policy isn't limited to heavy industry. Carney also specifically mentioned prioritizing Canadian manufactured goods and technology. This opens the door for supporting advanced manufacturing sectors. Think electric vehicle components made in Windsor, clean energy technology developed in Calgary, AI software for government systems designed in Waterloo or Montreal. This is the vision Carney is painting, a more self-reliant, industrially diverse Canada, powered by government investment directed inward. It's a compelling picture. More jobs, building the nation, strengthening sovereignty. It sounds like a perfect plan, doesn't it? But as anyone managing their household budget knows, everything has a price. And the potential price of Buy Canadian, combined with massive deficit spending, might be felt most sharply every time you go to the grocery store or pay your heating bill. The price tag, inflation and debt? Let's talk about the risks. The biggest, most immediate risk is inflation. Mark Carney himself acknowledged this in his speech, stating the obvious. The cost of living is still far too high. He's right. But here is the critical detail, the nuance that gets lost in the headlines. Statistics Canada just released the latest inflation numbers on October 18, 2025. The official headline Consumer Price Index, CPI, stands at 3.8%. Many economists will tell you that number is stabilizing, maybe even heading in the right direction. But why doesn't it feel that way for so many people, especially those on fixed incomes or retirees? Why does it feel like your purchasing power is shrinking much faster? Because it likely is. If you dig deeper into the official data, you find a troubling split. While overall inflation is 3.8%, the inflation rate specifically for food and shelter, the absolute necessities, is still running hot at 5.5%. Let me repeat that. 5.5% for the things you must buy. You are not imagining it. Your lived experience is real. The items you, especially if you're in the 55 plus demographic, spend the largest portion of your budget on are rising much, much faster than the official average number suggests. So, with that painful reality as our baseline, what happens when the Buy Canadian policy kicks into high gear? There's a potential inflationary double whammy. First, potentially higher costs. Let's be honest. Goods produced in Canada, with higher labor standards, environmental regulations, and potentially smaller economies of scale, might be more expensive than goods imported from countries with lower costs. Forcing government projects to buy domestic could mean paying a premium. Second, supply constraints. If these massive nation-building projects create a sudden surge in demand for Canadian steel, lumber, or components, can Canadian industries ramp up production fast enough? If demand outstrips domestic supply, basic economics tells us prices will rise. Who pays for these higher prices? Ultimately, taxpayers do. And consumers do. This could push that already painful 5.5% inflation for essentials even higher. It risks making the cost of living crisis worse, particularly for seniors whose incomes don't keep pace. That's the inflation risk. Now let's talk about the other elephant in the room, the national debt. Remember that $82.4 billion deficit forecasted by the PBO. A deficit simply means the government is spending more money than it's taking in through taxes. That difference has to be borrowed. Every year the government runs a deficit, it adds to the national debt. Who eventually pays back that debt plus interest? Future generations, your children, your grandchildren. Loading up on debt today has consequences down the road. It can mean higher interest payments for the government, crowding out spending on healthcare or education. In extreme cases, if debt grows too large too quickly, it can lead to a crisis of confidence from international investors, higher borrowing costs for everyone, and potentially painful austerity measures later on. This taps into another core anxiety for the 55-plus audience, the fear of leaving a mess for the next generation to clean up, the desire for fiscal responsibility, for ensuring a stable future for their families. So, this is the tightrope Mark Carney is walking. This is the core of the generational gamble. He is betting big. He's betting that the economic growth spurred by these massive investments and the Buy Canadian policy will be strong enough to overcome the inflationary pressures from potentially higher domestic costs, strong enough to generate enough new tax revenue in the future to start paying down that $82.4 billion deficit in the accumulated debt. It's an ambitious investing for growth strategy. It acknowledges that you sometimes need to spend money to make money, or in this case, spend money to build a stronger economy. But the risks are undeniable. If the growth doesn't materialize as hoped, if inflation spikes further, if global economic conditions sour, the gamble could backfire spectacularly. If he's right, he might just secure Canada's industrial future and create widespread prosperity. If he's wrong, he could trigger the very cost of living crisis he promised to solve, while leaving behind a mountain of debt. The generational gamble. So let's bring it all together. Mark Carney's vision of generational spending and his Buy Canadian policy is undeniably bold. It's a clear departure from the economic orthodoxy of the past few decades. It promises a revitalization of Canadian industry. It promises good, stable jobs for Canadian workers. It promises a more self-reliant, resilient nation. These are aspirations that resonate deeply, especially with those who remember a time when Canada built more of its own future. But this vision comes with a hefty price tag and significant risks, staring us right in the face in that $82.4 billion deficit figure. There's the very real risk of worsening inflation, particularly hitting the essentials like food and housing, which disproportionately affects seniors and those on fixed incomes. Remember that 5.5% number. And there's the long-term risk of burdening future generations with unsustainable national debt if the projected economic growth doesn't pan out. This truly is the ultimate generational gamble. Carney is betting the economic future of Canada on the belief that strategic, inward-focused investment, even funded by debt, is the key to unlocking lasting prosperity. He is betting that rebuilding Canada's industrial heartland is worth the risk of higher inflation and massive debt, directly impacting the financial security of the very 55-plus audience whose support, or at least tolerance, he needs to make this plan work. Success could redefine Canada for decades to come. Failure could inflict lasting economic pain. Now I turn it over to you. Carney calls this generational investment. Critics might call it generational debt. Based on what you've heard today, the promises of jobs, the reality of the $82.4 billion deficit, the sting of 5.5% inflation on essentials, what do you think? Will this massive spending and the Buy Canadian focus genuinely create lasting jobs and strengthen Canada's economy in the long run? Or will it mainly lead to higher prices, a deeper debt crisis, and more financial hardship down the road? What is your biggest concern? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments section below. But the success of this entire Buy Canadian dream hinges on whether it actually creates those promised jobs in key industries like steel and lumber. Is it realistic? Can Canadian companies compete? In our next video, we'll take a deep dive specifically into those sectors. We'll investigate if this policy can truly revitalize Canada's industrial core, or if it's just wishful thinking. Click here for that deep dive.